All right, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Friday, November 21st, and let's start by talking a bit more about Ukraine. Seems like there's a
Oh,
lot going on right there. And the big one is just this corruption scandal. A lot of people are saying that was kind of conveniently timed. Why did this scandal happen? And at just this precise moment, it feels like a perfect storm. We talked about the problems on the front line and just manpower issues and the financial cliff they're approaching. And then on top of it, boom, this massive corruption scandal. Some
uh-huh.
people are saying, is it Trump that wanted to do this to push forward his peace plan?
Yeah. Yeah, there are all kinds of conspiracy theories swirling around the corruption scandal. Um, I don't give them much weight. Well, first of all, we have to remember that these investigations started months ago, or maybe, I think maybe even more than a year ago. And it was just a couple months ago that, in response to the progress that these investigations were making, that Zelensky actually attempted to shut down the investigation by taking over the agencies. If you remember, Nabu and Sapo, it's how, um, and that failed. There was, people went out on the streets. Again, a lot of these people that are employed by NGOs, the kind of the westernized liberal segment of the Ukrainian population, and there are a lot of protests from Europe. And the other thing to remember is that actually these agencies, they are closely tied to Europe. So if you're going to look for some sort of conspiracy, I think you should look towards Europe because Europe funds them, or is closely tied to them. It used to be originally when these agencies were first created following the coup. The U.S. was very much involved, but the U.S. over time has actually kind of pulled away. And then as a result of the cuts in USAID funding and other moves by the Trump administration, they've become European creatures and they're very close. Europe's very close to them, but it's hard to see uh, what Europe might be trying to accomplish here. I think in the previous episode, I was just talking about Ukrainian politics as it exists today. And that if you're looking for like a real clear ideological faction or a different policy, it's hard to know where to look because as a result of Zelensky's suppression of opposition parties, and opposition media, there really isn't a real opposition. There's some very minor parties, but they're not, opposed in really a very significant way to the government's policies. So you don't see a faction or even an individual who would present a real alternative to Zelensky and his people. Now, it's possible, and I think I floated this possibility last time that, for example, the Europeans are maybe fed up with Zelensky, maybe in part because of the corruption. That's a real problem. They want to give him money, but they don't want half of it to go into the pockets of himself and his cronies. Because their money is limited. I think their concern about corruption is probably is real. And the other thing too is that he clearly has been making a lot of mistakes on the battlefronts. His refusal to retreat until it's too late, and then his soldiers get surrounded. And there's criticism that has come from Europe and the U.S. About his poor military commanding skills. And so maybe they just want to make him more responsive, get some more control over him. I think it's unlikely they want to get rid of him. I think because again, there's really not an alternative. It could be destabilizing. He has been a symbol of Ukraine, for a long time. They built him up. It's a little bit hard to tear him down now. But if they can get like Yermak out and some of the others around him, perhaps they could weaken him and increase their influence over him. That's about as far as I would go on a conspiracy theory. Because again, I don't see how the U.S. actually could be behind this. Because this has been in the works for a while. And the U.S. doesn't actually have the leverage that Europe does. And Europe is on this question of, a peace treaty is at loggerheads with U.S. They're on completely the opposite side of them. So anyway, that's my response.
So you think that it's more Europe that has more control over these anti-corruption agencies and they're leading the charge
Yeah. Well,
more?
potentially, maybe not. Maybe this might actually, these anti-corruption agencies might actually
Be
occasionally
independent?
engage. Yeah. Well, they're not entirely independent, but they
I
may be
just
partially independent and occasionally actually launch investigations that are real and carry through with them. I know we become so deeply cynical that we don't even see that possibility. But Ukrainians themselves are angry about corruption. And a lot of people who are very devoted to the Maidan regime and even to the war do want to see corruption go down. Uh,
Yeah, it's hard to believe though. It just feels like anything that Kiev does, Ukraine does, it seems like we are involved in some
right.
capacity. And
Yeah. Well,
that
if it's these agencies, it would be Europe. So that's why I said, yeah, maybe the Europeans are involved, but it wouldn't be over this question of the peace treaty, which I think took them by surprise, when this investigation actually started a long time ago.
Right. It makes sense to me more if you say that Trump tries to weaken him to force this peace plan down Zelensky's throat. For Europe, that's
Yeah.
obviously not their goal. Why would they want to weaken Zelensky? And actually, we kind of, when we talk about Ukraine and corruption, we isolate it a bit, like, oh, this corrupt regime. But really, the corruption is not just Ukraine. We are complicit in this corruption. All of Europe, all of the United States, we know they're getting kickback. So, maybe we know this is just the tip of the iceberg in Ukraine, but there is a real possibility if Zelensky believes that it is Trump or if it is Europe that is coming after him and weakening him with these corruption charges, that they could probably pull dirt out on, they're all doing cocaine together, right? The Keir Starmer and there's that train, okay, where they had that, there's some suspicious activity that was noticed. But anyways, they're obviously very close. And I know that this corruption extends beyond just Ukraine. So there's a lot of skeletons in Europe's closet as well. And this is something that I think will just happen inevitably as Ukraine starts to collapse, is that it's going to be like, oh, yeah, well, he did this, he did that. And then it's just going to be this blame game. And there's so much dirt and nastiness that's going to bubble up to the surface on both sides.
Right.
If they go down this route.
I don't really know if you find the same kind of corruption on the European side. It's not to excuse the Europeans. If they know this corruption is going on and they're covering it up, then that is, I think, a real dereliction of duty. This is taxpayer money. They're sending it there. They know that the Ukrainians are siphoning off a large portion of it. That in itself, I think, should be damning. And I think as this news comes out and the image of the golden toilet and all that, it makes people mad. They think, hey, that's where my money went. It went into that golden toilet or what. It's become a symbol of Ukrainian corruption. Now, as for our actual politicians getting paid off, maybe in some cases, I tend to, maybe I am just hopelessly naive, but I don't think you're going to find a whole lot of that.
I think you're right. I think the way you've mentioned this before, it's like the golden toilet, that's blatant corruption. But what happens in the West is we have more institutionalized corruption. Like, why does Lindsey Graham love war so much? Okay, well, he's getting kickbacks from Raytheon, the defense sector, the industries,
or contributions,
stock prices,
technically.
Yeah, right, contribution. So it's that type of thing. It's special interest groups, lobbying. It's technically legal, but we know that they're making tons of money off of this. So it's still a grift for them as well, right?
Yeah.
But Ukraine has to have some dirt, I'm sure. They're
well, they probably they have a good intelligence agency built up by the CIA, and I'm sure that, like all intelligence agencies, they're always collecting dirt on their allies. So sure, that may be a possibility there. Again, it's just like this new peace treaty push, just came out of the blue recently. So I don't really see, it may be that we have to reverse cause and effect here. Oh, it's not that this is part of a plan, to open, to weaken Zelensky so that the U.S. can impose a treaty on him. It's the other way around. It's just, okay, this corruption scandal broke. Zelensky is weakened. Hey, maybe this is the time to spring the peace treaty on him. You see what I mean? I think that makes more sense if we really look at the timeline.
Well, do you think then that it's possible that Zelensky is in such a weakened state and things are so bad on the front line that there will actually accept some type of plan that's acceptable to Russia as well?
It's theoretically possible. Again, he is truly completely dependent on the U.S. He and his regime, they're dependent on the U.S. So it just means but the U.S. has to back this up and firmly, and they have to be believable. They have to be credible. And the thing is, they lack credibility because we've seen so many reversals. Just, it's been dizzying just in the last few weeks. One day, Trump is. We don't even have to go into it. We know. And Zelensky's aware of that. Zelensky, last time he got together with him, Trump was real firm. He was apparently, sticking to the Russian position. And, even cast the maps aside that Zelensky had brought to the meeting. But in the end, Zelensky persuaded him. And he's probably thinking he can persuade him again. And he's probably right. That's the truth. But if they really stuck to their guns, then they wouldn't have any choice. I mean, if the U.S. stuck to their guns, the Ukrainians wouldn't have any choice. The problem is that again, a lack of consistency and just on the U.S. side. Now, so he's already stated that he's rejected it. He didn't say I reject the whole plan, but he actually rejected like the most important points. No territorial concessions. Okay, no prohibition on NATO membership, and no reduction in armed forces. And so, those are probably perhaps the three most important points in the plan, and he's already rejected them. So anyway, we're not. Unless the U.S. actually truly plays hardball and does it more than 3 days. Back in the spring, if you recall, there was an effort to get him to agree to a ceasefire. Back then, he wasn't even in favor of a ceasefire. Now he's all in favor of it. And so the U.S. declared we're shutting off arms shipments. We're not going to supply, intelligence, etc. And that lasted all of a week. It's not even clear if the intelligence sharing really stopped, but it was so it made, and they did go to a ceasefire. So there was a show, but I think probably they were on the edge of the ceasefire and they saw that maybe actually it makes sense to have a ceasefire because we're losing and we need to regroup. So they did it. But I think these are much more serious points, and they're not gonna cave in. Unless they're truly forced to. And I just don't have the faith in the current administration to really follow through on this.
Yeah. I saw a headline this morning saying that there was U.S. threatening to stop arms shipments to Ukraine. But it's like the boy who cried wolf. We said that before, and just nothing really changes. So, we'll see what happened. But at the end of the day, maybe Mark Sloboda says really all that really matters is the front line, the battlefield. It's 80% decided there. The rest is just noise. But on the battlefield, it is horrific right now, right? They're still holding out in Minnograd, but it's completely surrounded from my understanding now. Yeah. Why won't they surrender? Why are there still? I'm very impressed that they won't, but it just seems like it's complete suicide now. They can't break it open. They can't get out.
Right.
They have, Russia has complete air superiority. They're just dropping fab bombs on these high rises.
Yeah, no, it's hard to understand. Of course, some did surrender, but really, I don't think we didn't have a mass surrender. And I guess I'll just repeat the points I made earlier. Some of them are true fanatics, the ultra-nationalists, and maybe that's who you have there. Maybe those are the ones that they will fight to the death. For them, it's almost a fate worse than death to actually surrender to the Russians. They're all about opposing and killing Russians, and they're almost happy to die in the cause of fighting Russia. There are people like that. And then the other is, some of them have been truly brainwashed. They've been told again and again that if the Russians get a hold of you, they'll torture you straight for a year, and then likely kill you after that. It's better to die fighting. And some of them, I think, probably actually believe that. And then you have people that do want to surrender, but they're they're scared that they're going to get shot in the back. And that does happen. We're not talking just a few occasions, but there are, countless videos of soldiers attempting to surrender and getting shot or struck by drones. So there's that too. That's all I can offer. That's all I can.
Do you know what it's like? Have you read reports from soldiers, Ukrainian men on the front, like what it's like for them out there?
Yeah, I've read some. I think I need to read more, but I've read some. One thing, it was an interesting account I read recently. It just said that, we never even saw a Russian soldier. It's just that they're just striking us with drones, the fabs, the artillery. They knew where we were and were taking us out, but we never even saw them. We didn't even have a chance to shoot at them. And, that's what that tells you, is that, again, the Russians have overwhelming superiority in firepower. And
I heard that as well, that they said that we never even see the enemy. And you said a lot of these people, maybe they don't want to surrender because they want to die fighting. You're not fighting. You're just dying. That's it. Because what happens is they take these high rises and they hang out there until a fab bomb drops on it. Yeah. And then the whole thing is just wiped out, or they peek outside. And I saw some videos, just this whirring of drones and just these explosions. It's just, my God, it's terrifying. Yeah, it's like, what are you supposed to do as a soldier there? What are you supposed to shoot at? Like you say, you don't see it. Oh, here comes a bomb. Oh no, there's 1,000 drones in the sky. Well, and so the fact that they're not surrendering, and it sounds like Zelensky keeps on trying to send whatever remaining troops he has to break open this pocket, and it's just not working. It's over. And then after it feels like a last stand type of situation in Minnograd.
Yeah. Well, we've seen similar last stands in other places too.
But I mean,
it's hard to explain.
Last stand.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It may very well be, but it's hard to explain because, again, it doesn't really make military sense. If you're going to lose, your men are surrounded, it actually makes sense for them to surrender, because they will have, if they do surrender, they do have a chance to fight another day, and they can be exchanged for prisoners. You can exchange them with the Russian prisoners you have, but if they're dead, they're lost forever. So what does it do for you and especially they're in a situation where they, like we were just saying, they can't even really do it and inflict any harm on the enemy. They just wait for a fab to drop on the building that they're holed up in. It doesn't make a bit of military sense. It doesn't. And there's been a lot of criticism of Zelensky and Syrskyi because of this. There's been a rising chorus of criticism. One thing I just maybe should add, now that we're on the subject, is that I don't see, we talk about a possibility of a coup or some, or a replacement for Zelensky. I don't, that could happen, but if it does happen, I don't think there's going to be any real significant change. I think it's more likely, if there's going to be a coup, it will come from the military. And it will probably be, there are a couple of commanders that are quite popular within the military. One is the Andrei Beletsky that I mentioned earlier, who is very much an ultra-nationalist. The other one is an ultra-nationalist too. His name escapes me for the moment. They're both ultra-nationalists. They have, Beletsky's an Azov guy. He actually has his nom de guerre is the White Führer. Anyway, but he's popular within among the soldiers. And, again, obviously the soldiers, they have the guns. So if there's going to be a coup, I think it'd probably come from the military side. And
would they want to continue the fight, these guys?
Well, yeah, unfortunately they are, a lot of them are actually do want a ceasefire, along the European lines, but they want to fight another day. They're not going to give up the fight against Russia. It is all about, killing Russians for them. But it could have real consequences for Ukrainian society, because they do have their vision of an ethnically pure ultra-nationalist, society. And we've seen that carried out already to a great extent because they have so much influence on the government. So, the suppression of the Russian language, but they just might carry that even farther. I mean, that's a real possibility.
Well, if there's a military coup, wouldn't that just be really damaging in terms of the West being able to support this
Yeah,
regime anymore? I mean,
right. Especially if it's the white Führer takes over. They'll do
right.
it. They'll do what they can. The Western press. They'll do what they can to spin it and to cover up and whatever. But it's going to be hard to keep that fact away from people. The white Führer is now running Ukraine, right?
Yeah, but and well, also just like we said, we're approaching this fiscal cliff in a couple of months in the
Yeah.
spring. So what's the plan if Europe doesn't come up with the money, and then trying to convince your population to give up money for the white Führer is just going to be so much more difficult, right? It's just not going to happen.
The white Führer
I don't think
sitting, and the gold toilet, right?
Right. I don't think it. I mean, even if not if Zelensky stays and consolidates power still, and he's still around when this cliff comes, I still don't think it just the writing's on the wall, and I feel like there's now
it
consensus.
does look like it really is. But it's amazing how the Europeans or the European leadership just refuses to recognize it, refuses to recognize reality. Yeah, and the moment they heard about this 28-point peace plan, they just went after it. They rejected it. They were alarmed and horror at it. And there were calls between them and Zelensky and said, yeah, we got to stop this. You got to make sure, don't agree to this no matter what, they would tell Zelensky. Yeah, that's all fine and good, but they don't have anything to back it up with. You say, go fight. And then, hopefully the Americans will give you something because we don't have anything. That's what it is. I'm just thinking, contrasting that to Boris Johnson back in 2022, when the Ukrainians were apparently close to signing the Istanbul Agreement, which would have ended the war back then. Boris went there and said, "We've got your back. Don't sign this. We're not going to support you if you sign this. But if you do fight, we'll support you to the end, and you'll win." Well, then, actually there were great stockpiles of weapons, and there was this faith in the superiority of NATO weaponry and NATO tactics and whatever. And so there was maybe a reason. It turned out to be, a false confidence, but you could understand why they had some kind of sort of confidence. It wasn't completely. It was based on some facts, right? But now there's nothing. So what is it? They're going and telling him, but they don't even have anything to. And you would think that maybe he's kind of noticed that it's not working out the way that old Boris promised him. But they're continuing. They just don't have any plan B. So they're just kind of doubling down on plan A that just is becoming increasingly hard to it was kind of is dissolving before their eyes, let's say.
Yeah, well, I mean, NATO, they still have this propaganda out there saying how we're the greatest fighting force in the world. Do you think that most people in Western Europe still believe that? Do you think that there's still a lot of faith in NATO and the strength of NATO, that like if we really did have to fight Russia, we'll win hands down? Because there is that rhetoric coming out. You do hear Mark Rutte saying that just combined power, our GDP, look at our strength. We're so much more powerful than Russia. This would be a cakewalk. Or maybe they don't say cakewalk, but
Yeah. Well, you still hear it. So I'm afraid that probably a lot of them still believe it.
Is there any truth to how prepared is NATO to fight Russia?
I don't think they're prepared at all. Well, first of all, they've depleted their stockpiles. But I think maybe most importantly is that like Russia has learned how to fight this kind of war, the 21st century war, and they've developed weapons for it. They developed tactics for it. NATO is living in the past. They're ready to fight a 20th century war, and they don't even have the weapons to fight a 20th century war. They've used up a lot of those already. And then you have this I think a general apathy when you look at the polls. Not those people living in Poland, but the surveys, I should say. There is very little willingness to go fight Russia. If Russia actually invaded their countries, maybe there would be a change, but that's just not going to happen. It's going to have to be something invented by these leaders, some that So it just seems very, very unlikely that they're going to put together a real army. They don't even, they really don't have, on paper, they have maybe a couple 100,000 or something soldiers that they could send to the front. Well, they don't even really have the logistical infrastructure. It would take some months to get them all there. And then to, keep them armed and supply, it would be a real effort. Like, earlier, I think the Brits and the French were saying, well, right now, if you asked us to do it, maybe we could get 2,000 each one of us up there. That's, again, I've told, like 2,000 is in this war wouldn't last you a day or a week. So yeah, they're in no position. I mean, the U.S. could do something. The U.S. still does have a large standing army, men under arms, and
but
they do have a substantial Air Force, whatever, but I think you can make a lot of the same criticisms. It's still an army that was geared to fight a war a generation ago.
Yeah, well, and also you're talking about moving hundreds of thousands of men. I mean, Russia has 800,000 that are like actively deployed now, and hundreds of thousands that are in reserve, and these are all volunteers. Right. These aren't people. There's no conscription, no draft where these guys had to be pulled from, and just the fact that you're saying that people within Western Europe, all the polls show that there's no appetite for war. I think that in itself is kind of recognition, a little bit of the weakness. It's like if we were really strong, then there would be more people that would be okay with it, would be willing to sign up for it. You're saying either that people don't believe in the cause or they believe that there's no way to win, and both of those things just mean you need both of those things, Right. So if they don't have any hope, it's just... Yeah, so the writing is on the wall then. It's just like you're not going to be able to... NATO can't enter this fight because they're not prepared to fight it. There's no popular support for it. We are coming to the end. It's the end game, and it's just going to be an ugly end. It's going to end, in chaos. I think it's going to end a lot of scapegoating, finger-pointing, blaming, and I think we're going to see more and more skeletons come out of the closet of just corruption all around. And it'll be, I'm here to, I'll take out my popcorn to watch this, watch this thing fall apart. But I hope that we can just end the killing, though. I mean, is there any good news for the people of Ukraine? I mean, right now,
no, well, I guess the only good news is what you're talking about. It's just there are these hard constraints, no matter what. This peace treaty initiative is not going to succeed. We can get into why it won't. But a collapse is coming, and that's the best thing. Of course, would be for them to agree to Russia's terms, and they would actually be able to preserve a good part of their country, and it could stop the killing right now. But they're not going to. So many more people are going to die. They're going to lose a lot more territory before it happens. But eventually it will happen. There will be this collapse, and there will be a rump Ukraine. Probably we're talking about, maybe 50% of the territory or 60% of the territory, landlocked will remain. It'll be a much impoverished Ukraine. It'll be a Ukraine that will be ruled over by angry people, who are still not so much focused on rebuilding their country as somehow getting back at Russia. And unfortunately, that's the future that we're looking at.
How can we make them not angry? Because that's really what we need. It's just this is the problem with war. It just right. There's so much death and pain and destruction, and that drive for vengeance is just out there, and it could carry on for decades. Right. And so, how do we end that anger? How do we show compassion?
I don't know that it's possible. There were, of course, the war didn't even have to happen. We had. Going all the way back, we don't have to go through the whole history, of the coup, the Minsk Accords, the Istanbul Agreement. There were all these off-ramps, before the coup, there were off-ramps, there were agreements, and every one of them was broken. And again, because on the Ukrainian and the Western side, very important, the support of the U.S. and the Europeans, they always pushed the maximalist position. They never say, don't give in to the Russians, don't agree to it. But each one of those agreements would have been a lot better than the agreement that followed. It gets worse and worse and worse, right? If one of those earlier agreements had been accepted, by the Ukrainian side, yeah, we could have avoided all the hatred, and maybe there really would have been a way of burying the hatchet, at least a real possibility of it, and an attempt to, live at peace with each other in a cooperative relationship. But with every passing day, that becomes more difficult. There are more and more widows, more and more orphans, more and more people in Ukraine that are going to be bitter against the Russians and against, I think, their own leaders. So there's just going to be bitterness all around.
What about the U.S. and Europe? I would be pretty angry
well,
with them.
you actually, that's, I think, being increasingly voiced within Ukraine. So, what I worry about is that it could be sort of similar to World War I. Again, the Germans lost. They were forced to accept, harsh terms, but they weren't utterly defeated. In other words, there was this angry Germany that was still there, could still strike back, and eventually did. And you could have an angry Ukraine. I don't know, it might be so weakened, but who knows? It's always going to be working to develop alliances with other anti-Russian countries, and
will that be all of Western Europe, though? Are they still going to be in that position?
I don't know. Probably not. Maybe we're just talking about, again, it's the Baltic states that just seem to be the most fanatically anti-Russian, and followed by the Poles. But the Brits too, the British leadership is just fanatically anti-Russian. So that's all going to still be there. And there's going to be a sense that we got stabbed in the back. This shouldn't happen. We can't live with this. And I will be working for a time to find some way to get that territory back, and to harm the Russians. And there will always be a risk of the war erupting once again. That's what I'm afraid of. So, again, when Mearsheimer says an ugly victory, I think that's what he means. It's just not
But will Russia
allow that? It's going to be a victory
that?
Without a real peace,
But I mean, if there's that possibility that it's just going to be this festering wound that might erupt into another large war, and that Russia, they always say we got to have to address the root causes. Will they allow any type of resolution that allows for that possibility? Or do you think they won't have a choice?
Yeah, well, it's hard, when they'll try to minimize that. And one thing is, again, by taking, let's say, Nikolaev and Odessa, they make Ukraine into a landlocked country, and then that really does reduce the threat. They can't operate in the Black Sea, and they've done a fair amount of damage, through, primarily through drones that they've used on the Black Sea. But they won't be able to do that anymore. So that's something, they do reduce the threat in that way. And, but, to actually, to really end the threat entirely, you would have to take over the whole country. And I know that Mark Slobodka, he argues that that's what they will have to do. And he might be right. It just might be that, okay, they don't want to, but then they see that the instant they stop, the Western powers are going to send troops into the Western Ukraine, and that's something that they can't tolerate. And so they always feel like they're forced to go on. But they may also say, we really don't want to, these people do truly hate us over there in Western Ukraine, and we're just going to have this horrible, occupation. It'll be an occupation that's constantly marred by violence and assassinations and so forth. It's just, I think they're going to be very, very reluctant to go there. But as a consequence of not going there, they haven't really removed the threat. It's still there. There are these people fanatically opposed to him who want to get it back, who's just, there will be all kinds of people rising up who are going to promise, I will restore Ukraine, right? We'll make Ukraine great again. And they'll find supporters within Western Europe. Again, maybe it won't work. Maybe what we can hope for is just that Ukrainian population, even the Western one, will say that, look, this didn't work. we actually trusted you people, right, to make Ukraine great, and this is what you gave us. You're out of here, and maybe we could actually get a government that is willing to bury the hatchet and accept neutrality and begin to rebuild. That's not impossible. It really isn't. When you're talking about mass psychology, who knows? You just can't count on it. It could go either way.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect to see something akin to a rout soon?
Yeah, we are seeing something akin to a rout. I think again in the Zaporozhye region, the northern Zaporozhye, where the Russians are in the process of surrounding Guliopole. That's happening. It just seems like the Ukrainians just are not able to put up any significant resistance there. They'll where normally you might have to fight for a couple of weeks to take a village of a certain size, or let's say a small town. It lasts. It's a matter of days, a couple of days, and then the battle's over and the Russians take it. And that's happening again and again over there. And Guliopole probably will fall pretty quickly. It's already in pinches.
If this peace plan that Trump is trying to push through just falls through completely, do you think that's it from now on? It's going to be a complete surrender of Ukraine will have to just wave the white flag, and then if so, what does that mean? Is there a new administration that Russia gets to approve and put in? I mean,
yeah. Well, we don't see any signs that they're that they're going to surrender. That's the thing, is that we refuse to surrender. That's the position of the Zelensky government right now. And so I don't see any signs of that happening immediately. Looks like they have every intention of continuing the fight, but it's just their ability to continue the fight is diminishing by the day. And it will be, I don't know how long it'll last, but maybe I expect that sometime next year. It's a question: will it be early next year or late next year? I don't know. The Russians will be all the way to the Dnieper. It looks like they're poised to do that, and they will have taken Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. And at that point, well, will they keep on fighting? They will be weaker, but they'll have the Dnieper as a barrier, and maybe they'll actually try to build up, some significant fortifications. It's something that they haven't been doing very well. That's one reason why the front is really collapsing down there in Zaporozhye. They had all that time to do something, and they built some trenches, but they built them in the wrong direction. So you got to see some sort of, I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't look good, but there still is a fight ahead of us, and they don't show any sign of giving up that fight. That's how I'll put it.
It's amazing that I have to respect their willingness to fight, the refusal to surrender. I mean, part of it is under duress and threatened, we'll shoot you in the back or if you try to run or flee. But it's still just insane how, when we were talking earlier about how the Ukrainians are saying they don't even get to see the enemy. They don't even get to fire back. They get blown up by a fat bomb or a drone. It's just despite that fact that you're losing so heavily, and it's just still saying that no matter what, and there's nothing out there that can save you, and they just keep on going. It's unbelievable to me, just grinding Ukraine down. That the population's been halved.
Right.
So many people have died, and they're just continuing to die, and just what? To lose more territory every day?
Well, it's true. I'm surprised that there's still so many soldiers willing to fight and so few willing to surrender. I don't entirely understand that. But don't forget that the desertion rate has been going up.
That's true.
Yeah, consistently. So we're looking at the ones that are on the line. Either got stuck there and are scared and are being killed, or just are one of those true believers. It looks like a majority of these conscripts actually run away, before they ever get to the line. And that is a worsening problem. This is not a Russian talking point. This is what the Ukrainians themselves are saying. They've had, according to official statistics, 290,000 deserters. Very few in the first year, but, it's increased from year to year and month to month. And in this past year, they've had, way more than they had in previous years. And that's the trend. It's just that so, you're talking about a willingness to fight. Actually, in the general population, that willingness has gone way, way, way down. It's just those few that they manage to get up there who are either some combination of scared or committed, still do fight. But the rest of them do not want to fight and are hiding in basements or they're, in other countries right now.
Right. Yeah, the Western media, they always talk about the massive Russian casualty numbers. Like, oh, okay, Pokrovsk looks like they're taking it, but they lost 17 million men in the process or whatever. Just absurd numbers. But then we hear the Ukrainians say things like, we don't even get to see the Russians. We don't even get to shoot back. We just get killed by them. Right. So, I mean, obviously these things do not, they don't jive. That doesn't make sense. Do you have any idea on the casualties? Like, I know it's just speculation, but just hearing that statement saying that we don't even get to see them, we don't even get to see the Russians, is like, clearly you are got to be suffering heavy casualties.
I really don't know. I just don't, because we just don't know. And maybe one day we'll find out. I think probably we will one day.
We will, right?
Yeah, but
how long will that take? If this war ends, like if we find out that the casualties, like 10 Ukrainians died to every Russian, and the West has just been eating up the story about how the Russians have to cannibalize their washing machines and attack people with shovels and human wave tactics that was fed for them for so long, and now. You're like, what? For every Russian that was killed by super NATO weaponry, 10 Ukrainians died by shovels?
Yeah. Yeah, I have no idea what the ratio is.
And I'm just saying, I'm just saying that, but
that could even be 10 to 1.
Right. It sounds reasonable, at least, especially now. I understand the beginning, we had the body exchange numbers to reflect that towards the beginning, where it seemed like there was more of a tit for tat kind of thing. Yeah. But since the past year and a half, it's just the exchanges are like 20 to 1.
Well, it's more than that, actually. Like the most recent one was, what was it, 1,000 to 30?
What are we doing here, guys? What is Ukraine doing?
Was it 1,000 to 30 or was it 10,000 to 30? I can't. Anyway, it's a huge,
ridiculous.
Right, and that's the way it's been for quite a long time. It's just we're talking more like 30 to 1. Yeah, in that case.
Well, if
I think in some cases it really has been close to like 10,000 to 50 or something. In some of them, they're huge disparities. Now, of course, that doesn't prove that that's the actual disparity in line, because that is a function of both deaths, of killing and of territorial capture.
Right.
And again, because the Ukrainians are, except for the occasional somewhat successful counterattack, they just never capture territory. So there is a reason why they're going to get fewer Russian bodies. So that's part of it. But it does suggest that there is a very, that the ratio is strongly tilted in the favor of the Russians.
So many bodies, so many people dead, just for nothing, and just it's just so insane that they will keep on fighting till the last Ukrainian. I mean, they're serious about that. I mean, we'll see if they end up recruiting the boys, the under 25s. That's all they have left. I pray to God they don't. I mean, this
right. Well, yeah, we're talking about the 18 to 24s, which, actually in the West would be recruited. But they're reluctant to do that because, first of all, they have such a serious demographic problem. Now, strangely, just a couple of months ago, Zelensky allowed that age group to leave the country temporarily. They're supposed to come back if they could when it's time to be conscripted, and immediately, I think in 2 months, 100,000 of them left. And I don't know since then. That was the first 2 months, and I think there's been another month since. So who knows how many have left. And who knows how many of those people already swam across rivers or, had left illegally. There is some confusion within Ukraine, a lot of about why Zelensky did that, because if they do finally make that move, it's going to be, there are going to be fewer young men that they'll be able to find, and even fewer that will be willing to fight. Yeah,
I remember we talked about that, and I theorized that maybe Zelensky just wants to understands that they're treating all of our men. So, and then what? Maybe you buy a couple of months or at the most, but basically you want to get to the bottom of the barrel as quickly as possible so you can say to NATO, like, look, that's it. We ran out of people. Nobody left. Now you have to come in, because that's where we're headed.
Yeah.
So it's like they're
Right.
going to
Or
say,
what will happen is maybe they'll start
sending women.
Oh yeah, well, there is talk of that. That comes, that's a topic that comes up again and again, or the European powers will deport the Ukrainian men, back to Ukraine to fight. And there's talk of that, again within Europe.
Yeah, there's going to be chaos throughout Europe. You try to round up those people to go die on the front. Okay, well, I think we've talked enough about Ukraine. Can we move over to an incident that happened in Israel recently? So Mike Huckabee had a secret meeting with Jonathan Pollard. Pollard, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I believe it's Pollard.
So, did you know much about that? Why? First of all, I just learned about Pollard just from you a couple weeks ago. Maybe you can just do a quick recap on who he is and why this was a big deal.
Right. Okay. Well, he is recognized as he was a spy that was caught, a spy for Israel, and it is understood, within the American intelligence community that he did more damage to the U.S. than any other spy in perhaps the history of this country. Certainly since, in the last few decades. He stole and transferred to Israel just countless documents, blueprints, top secret information on our. Much of it to do with our, nuclear submarines, the nuclear triad, and gave it all to Israel. And Israel actually used some of this and, bargained with the Soviet Union and sent some on to the Soviet Union. As a consequence, it was not just technical stuff. It was information about agents and, their identities, their locations, and agents were killed. So there is huge anger within the U.S. intelligence community, and especially, in the past. This happened like through the 1980s. I can't remember exactly when he was actually arrested. But there was an effort to, by Israel and its supporters to protect him, to keep him out of prison. But those efforts are almost always successful. It just happens again and again. In this case, it didn't. The intelligence committee, put its collective foot down and said, no, this guy is going to prison. He stayed in prison until 2015. He was released on parole, and there was anger about that. They felt like, this guy, he should have been executed, or at least stay in prison for life. But he was let out, and then eventually made his way to Israel, and that's where he is. And he was greeted as a hero within Israel. Well, just, the news came out, I think just yesterday, that Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, had a secret meeting. They say, anyway, that he didn't even clear this with his superiors. He just had this meeting with Jonathan Pollard, I believe, at the U.S. embassy there. And after the meeting, Jonathan Pollard came out and he actually badmouthed like the U.S. intelligence community. So I think there's, again, this is an old wound, and it has been, it's become sore again. There's a lot of anger over this incident, and it really does violate, standard, let's say, standard practice of an ambassador. It's not something that he should have done. I think even, it's generally recognized, and there should be a lot more anger than there is. Again, like if he was meeting secretly with a Russian spy or a Chinese spy, you can imagine what the response was. There has been a response, but in general, like from officials and the government, it's been very muted.
But why? What's the
it's
point
not
of
clear.
this meeting?
It is not clear. I don't understand why. That's, again, we're told that he did this on his own, but that's a little bit hard to believe. Who knows?
Right.
Again, we have so many Israel firsters within this administration that I kind of suspect that it was not just Huckabee doing something on his own initiative, but there's a group of them who, for whatever reason, want to establish a connection with Jonathan Pollard. I don't know why. I really don't have an answer for you there.
It just feels like Israel is in such a PR nightmare. What you don't want to do is have somebody, Jonathan Pollard, who is the epitome of just saying that we have this problem of Israeli influence in our government, and that they can act with impunity. Like this person that had the most damaging intelligence leak, say, in U.S. history. And then he gets pardoned by Trump and he gets flown to Israel.
It was 2015, so it was actually before. I think last time I said it was Trump, but it actually happened under Obama.
Yeah, well, I think Trump did something that allowed him to go back to Israel, right?
Oh, okay, maybe that was it.
I think that's.
I do recall something like that.
Yeah, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think that's correct. Yes.
So yeah, it's just. I like. Why would you do this? Don't you understand that the optics themselves are bad? And because I think a lot of people aren't aware of the story. I wasn't aware of the story. And it's just like, oh, give me another reason to be upset at Israel. It's like, okay, great. And I saw Max Blumenthal post a video about Jonathan Pollard, him speaking. And I want to share it with you just so people get an idea of who this person is and where his loyalties lie.
Admit this. We are now feeding our enemy. I mean, this has never happened in history before, and you have to ask why. And I don't want to hear this business that it's consistent with Jewish morality. It isn't. Anybody saying that doesn't know anything about Jewish morality at all. Oh, let me bring you back to October 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, when Henry Kissinger instituted an arms embargo against us. And what happened? What happened was an A-4 Skyhawk was parked at Tel Nof Air Base with some interesting weapons under its wings. And we told the Americans, take your eye in the sky and take a good look at the airplane that's on that runway. And the next day, the airlift started to Israel, the arms airlift.
So in other words, we threatened their...
We threatened to use unconventional weapons. I'll leave it at that. And so he said, is this what you want us to threaten now? I said, absolutely, except this time I want us to go forward with it if necessary. If they think we're bluffing, we go forward with it. Look, as far as I'm concerned, when we are faced with an existential threat, we have the right to use any and all weapons in our disposal to eliminate that existential threat. A lot of people don't know anything about nuclear weapons at all. What they are, how they can be used. And I'm tired of using euphemisms. I'm tired of saying, well, we have something, in the basement, but we won't be the first to introduce nuclear weapons in the Middle East. It's enough already.
Pretty scary, right?
Yeah.
Why are we meeting with this guy? Why is
exactly.
Huckabee? What is going on?
Yeah. I just looking at that, listening to him, just thinking, what kind of monster have we created? Now that, because he's right. They are. That's the Samson option. He was saying back there in 1973, they threatened to exercise that option, and that's something that we could be faced with again. That's the monster that we've created.
Right. I mean, I've heard that. I forget who, it might have been John Kiriakou, saying that Israel threatened the use of nuclear weapons if we didn't do something in Iran against their nuclear bases, and that's why we bombed Isfahan.
I can't hear you very well for some reason right now.
Nah. Can you hear me better now? Let me see. Hello?
It's still just somewhat mute.
Check your connection. Make sure you're plugged in all the way.
I should be.
Yeah? Is it better now? Hello?
Okay.
Is it better?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it seems a little better.
Okay. Is it?
Okay. Yeah, it's good enough.
Okay, sorry. What was I just saying?
Okay, that you heard from someone that the Israelis had threatened to use nuclear weapons, if we didn't support them in the attack on Iran. Is that, I think that's
right.
Right?
Yeah, right. And after hearing this, I'm like, yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just we're under this nuclear blackmail constantly, and we don't know it. But he's saying that they did it in 1973 or the Yom Kippur War, and like, it's just terrifying. It's just crazy that that's the case.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, that's the part. we talk about blackmail, but maybe the worst, we talk about the Epstein case and all that and Mossad, but maybe the blackmail that we should be really worried about is the nuclear blackmail. It is very worrying. We really have ourselves in a fix here.
It's also just, you hear the way he talks, how he says, this guy was an American citizen that was in our intelligence agencies.
Right.
And it's so clear that he is all about Israel, nothing else. And it's just, how many people do we have that in our country, especially in our intelligence agencies? You think that they'd have to be vetted, but it seems like this is where a lot of them are. They embed them in the intelligence agencies. They're embedded in AIPAC. And it's just like, this is crazy. We have real spies, operatives just embedded throughout our government.
Yeah.
And it's wild hearing this talk. I don't think I never realized this. I never understood this, but it's scary to think that, like, how much power that Israel has in these agencies, that they're able to do these things. And he does this, gets our own agents killed, this huge intelligence leak. And then we ship him to Israel, and then he makes threats like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think right there, that is the ugly face of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. I mean, I think that's, you have to acknowledge it. That's the way things are.
This is a unique situation, though, right? It's not common to have people living in your country that are citizens of that country, but have loyalties completely to another country. Right. Maybe there are some people, but they're not all inside intelligence agencies, inside these institutions.
Right.
Like, it's just, we need to purge these institutions.
Right.
Right. Anybody that has dual citizenship, they should not be working for these intelligence agencies. These intelligences, they're not our intelligence agencies. I feel like Israel believes that the CIA is also their intelligence agency. Do you think that's...
Yeah, that might be something of an exaggeration, but it's not a huge exaggeration. Clearly there's a great deal of influence. And we can see with the current, who is Mike Waltz? It's Ratcliffe, right? Who is now the head of the CIA.
But you can talk about Mike Waltz as well.
Yeah, but Mike Waltz as well. Yeah, but of course, he was the NSA, and I guess is now at the UN. But
National Security Advisor, and he was using a doctored signal app to send all these messages directly to Mossad, directly to Israel, right there, and he gets caught with it, and they just say, "Oh, okay, I guess we got to go to the UN now."
Yeah, right.
That's crazy.
So, yeah. Right, but Ratcliffe had from the very beginning of his political career has been really a creature of AIPAC and of Israel through AIPAC. He's one of these Israel firsters, of which there are too many, but there he is, the head of the CIA. Now, it's always been a problem. There's always been influence, and going way back, and quite a few people like Jonathan Pollard. He's the one that did the most damage, but there are obviously many that actually do put Israel first, and you can see the consequences of that. How did that happen? Well, again, it's just this so-called special relationship, and I think this tremendous fear of being called an anti-Semite. It's just people fear that it's so much that they don't actually perform the duties that they should. Again, if you're in charge of an intelligence agency, you should be making sure that you don't have anybody under you with a dual loyalty. But you begin to say, hey, wait a second, I think this person has a dual loyalty, but it's to Israel. Are you an anti-Semite? Say, okay, forget it. So you just let the problem grow. It's just like there's this tremendous fear of actually confronting the problem. And that's what's really led us to where we are now.
Yeah, well, it just scares me because he says that they will use any means necessary to eliminate any existential threat to Israel.
Right.
There is an existential threat to Israel right now. There's numerous ones, but the main one is actually not a war. Yeah. It's not something like the Yom Kippur War. It's the lack of support here in the U.S. It's just being exposed, and things like this. Mike Huckabee meeting Jonathan Pollard is accelerating that. Just everybody is seeing this, and the light has been shown on Israel's deep entanglement in our government, and they're scattering like cockroaches, and people are disgusted with what they're seeing. Yeah. So it's so. Do you see the Samson Option being executed? Will they Do they blow up New York or something because they're mad at Mamdani? I mean, like it's
yeah. Well,
crazy
I don't see
to
that.
even say that.
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
But I don't know. They say they will do anything, and I believe them.
Yeah. Well, again, just listening to Jonathan Pollard, you say, yeah, this guy is clearly a fanatic. Let's be honest. And there are a lot of the unfortunate thing is that there are a lot of fanatics in Israel, and a lot of them have real power. So yeah, there is real reason to be afraid, to what they're going to do. Either there's the Samson option that's always there, but then who knows? Because there are a lot of Israel firsters within this country with a great deal of power, both, financial power and political power. And they are being faced with the greatest threat to their grip on power than they've, seen since the 1960s. It's just not possible that they're not going to fight back. They are fighting back. In fact, we see that happening quite openly. The takeover of these different, media companies and so forth. But it could get a lot worse. It could get a lot uglier when you have people like Jonathan Pollard, or have people who have this kind of thinking, and they have the power. What might they do? There's really no limits to what they might do.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that Mike Huckabee decided to meet him, it's just like Mike Huckabee needs to resign immediately, right? This is a traitor to the United States. It's what are you doing, man? Right. It's just because he's in Israel. Mike Huckabee cares more about Israel than he does America. He's an Israel firster too. He's a hardcore Christian Zionist.
Right. He's another flavor of Zionism, Christian
Zionism. So he probably is all for the Samson option. He wants to start the apocalypse, bring about the second coming, whatever. I don't know what's going on through these people's mind, what kind of crazy theology they have, but it's scary. It's scary. So that's just another thing that we got to worry that's probably going to happen during our lifetime, because I don't see the situation getting better for Israel, and it's just going to get worse and things will get weirder and weirder. And then let's hope we don't have a mushroom cloud, but Israel's in trouble. And when you look at these videos, like what Jonathan Pollard said, you realize that that's dangerous when they're in trouble. It's scary. And so it is. Yeah. Okay, how are you feeling? I got more of a philosophical question that I could throw at you. Are you up for something?
Well, you throw it at me and I'll see what I can do.
Okay, well, all right. Let me see how to frame this well. So I was just kind of thinking just about the generational differences that we have, just from your generation to my generation and now my kids' generation, just how we grew up. That and how it shapes society and the way that we think and look at the world. Because I grew up as a kid in the Unipolar Moment, and I remember being a proud American, loving to sing patriotic songs, obsessed with World War II, really thought we were the good guys. And I think that just sort of shaped a lot of the energy of my whole generation, my society. And then things started to get a little bit weirder when I was in college, became a little bit more aware. But now I'm just thinking about the younger generation. Like I see the popularity of somebody like Nick Fuentes, and I have young boys now as well, and I'm thinking about the America that they're going to grow up in. They're not going to have any concept of that unipolar moment of the might, or how when you grew up it was about the bloc politics, USSR versus the United States, capitalism versus communism. That's what shaped everything. Here, this new generation, like my kids, the way they're going to grow up and form is just this completely different view of America that I had or you had. I'm just wondering how that's going to affect society as a whole when we move forward, when you have a country that people that have a shame and self-loathing and kind of disgust now associated, a lot of the opposite feelings that I had when I was growing up that will be associated with America, especially as things begin to unravel, how this was supposedly a great country and it got bankrupted by corrupt people, that there were blackmail pedophiles that were involved in it as well, and all these wars, all this blood on our hand, all this guilt. What does that do to my generation, like my kids, when they grow up in that society where you have that idea of your nation? It's a big question, I know.
I don't know.
Maybe it's not a good thing to end on.
Yeah, it probably isn't. It's probably something we can think about and maybe talk about next time. Because I don't know that I really have an answer for you. And you probably have a better sense of what they're being exposed to than I am. I am part of that older generation. And
I just thought about it last night, just like how different, like you view the world and you grow up, and I appreciate your view, and you learned a lot from it. And then the way that where I grew up and the way that the nation was at that point, I think it has this huge effect on society. It just that goes on forever. You know, this idea of what it is to be an American and these values, and I'm just thinking like what we have now, what will that manifest into later? I know it's a big question. But.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's I can just say that it's going to pose serious challenges to the establishment that we have now. This establishment, right, is based on its previous generations, and the younger generation, you know, whether they're on the right part of the spectrum or the left, are clearly at odds with the comfortable arrangements that the establishment has now, and that's kind of, you know, the establishment, at least part of it, is waking up to that fact and is worried about it, and they're going to do what they can to fight it. I don't think they're going to be successful in that fight, and it's, you know, all I can see is that there is a crisis ahead of us, and I don't know how that's going to play out. I wish I could. I don't have a crystal ball to look into right now, but if I find that crystal ball, I'll let you know.
Yeah, we can discuss more about it more later. But I just think that the new battle for the worldview of the younger minds is taking place, and the government position worldview, the U.S. government worldview, is being rejected. It's not being accepted anymore by the youth. So it's just interesting to think about what that worldview is going to be. And
I guess I just say it's good that they're rejecting it, but just hope that they settle on something that's humane, that's better, that's sane. You know, there's always a risk. The problem in these times of crisis, and when the old order breaks down, that you know, they lose their faith in the establishment, but then sometimes they seize on something that's equally poisonous, if not more poisonous. You know, demagogues arise. There's a real danger of that. I'll just say that. But
we got to be careful. Right. That's right. We got to watch out for anger and retribution to take the wheel.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think we can end there. Unless any final words.
No, I think we can end. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Have a good rest of your day, Dad, and a great weekend.
Okay. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.